Story 1: The Night He Stopped Moving. I still have the first memo from that night. Even though I don't listen to it anymore, I know exactly what's on it. My own voice, barely louder than breath, saying, "He's still there." Not who, not what I meant, just there. Like I'd already accepted I was sharing the night with something I couldn't explain. The part that bothers me most is how calm I sound. Not brave, not even steady, just already tired in that way you get when your brain has been trying to solve the same wrong thing for too long. By the time I made that recording, I was already behind whatever had started. My name's Talia Mercer. I was 22 then, living by myself in a third-floor apartment in Richmond, in an old brick building off Grove Avenue with a parking lot so small everybody knew which car belonged to who. Mine was the silver Civic with the peeling college sticker in the back window. I worked mornings at a coffee place near Carytown, and because I hate going to sleep with my own thoughts just bouncing around, I had this stupid little ritual where I recorded a voice memo every night before bed. Just whatever happened that day, what I needed to remember, whether I had enough money for groceries, things like that. It was late August, sticky even after dark, and I had my window cracked because the air conditioner in that apartment sounded like a shopping cart with a bad wheel. The parking lot sat right below my window, half lit by one flickering streetlight that buzzed so constantly I only noticed it when the power dipped and it stopped for a second. Warm asphalt smell kept drifting in through the screen, mixed with drier sheet air from somebody's vent downstairs. Earlier that evening I ate leftover lo mein out of the carton. Scrolled until my thumb hurt, recorded my usual memo, and did what I always did before closing the blinds. Glanced down at the lot to make sure my car was still there. Quiet building. Quiet night. Nothing that should have stuck in my head. At 1:12 in the morning I went to the window again because I couldn't remember if I'd locked my car. I do that a lot when I'm alone. I check things twice, then once more because the second check somehow doesn't count. That's when I saw him under the streetlight. He wasn't really under it, not fully. The light made this hard, bright circle on the pavement, and he was standing right at the edge of it, where it fell off into shadow. I could see shoes, dark pants, the shape of a jacket, maybe a hood, but his face kept getting swallowed by that bad boundary where the light quit. He was facing the building. Not my window exactly, at least I didn't think so then. Just the building. I remember telling myself 3 separate reasonable things in maybe 10 seconds. He was waiting for a ride. He was locked out. He'd had an argument on the phone and was cooling off. I actually stood there making myself line them up because the other option was admitting there was a man standing almost motionless in a parking lot after midnight for no reason. I could see, and once I let myself think that, I knew I wouldn't sleep. So I shut the blind halfway, got in bed, and tried to act like I'd solved it. I lasted maybe 6 minutes. I checked again. Same posture. Same arms down. Head slightly angled like he was listening to something far away. A car came in from the alley side too fast, headlights sweeping the whole lot, and I honestly thought the driver was about to clip him. The car passed close enough that I sucked air through my teeth. He didn't react, didn't step back, didn't even turn. That was the first moment my brain started working too hard. I told myself maybe he was on something. Maybe he'd fallen asleep standing up, which even then I knew made no sense. Maybe I'd just caught him during the exact same second of movement twice, and that felt thin the second I thought it. I could feel my shoulders creeping up toward my ears. My room suddenly seemed hotter than it had a minute earlier. The comforter was twisted around my calves and damp from the humidity. I got up, went to the bathroom, drank tap water that tasted like metal, came back, checked again. Identical. He wasn't just still. He looked preserved. Like every time I glanced away, the night paused him, and every time I looked back, it resumed from the same frame. That's when I made the memo. I remember holding my phone too tight, thumb pressed white against the side, whispering because I felt stupid speaking at normal volume in an apartment with locked doors. "He's still there," I said. 112, guy in the lot under the light. "Maybe waiting for somebody." I said maybe waiting for somebody because I needed to hear myself be normal. After that, I tried to force routine back over it. I brushed my teeth. I plugged in my phone. I folded the throw blanket on the armchair even though it was already folded. Everything in me was angled toward the window, but I kept choosing little tasks because if I was still doing small, ordinary things, then obviously the situation was still small and ordinary. That's how it felt in my head. Like if I behaved right, the explanation would catch up, only it didn't. And one detail kept needling me in a way I couldn't pin down. Every time I looked down, his outline was the same, but the shadow near his feet wasn't. It would lean a little farther left or right, as if something had shifted, except his body never had. The light buzzed and snapped and made the edges of the lot jump. But this was different. It was like the darkness around him couldn't decide what shape he was supposed to make. Around 1:40, I did something I wish I hadn't done. I replayed my first memo from earlier that night, the one I'd recorded before bed. Most of it was nothing. Me talking about a rude customer. Me reminding myself to call my mom back. Me saying I needed laundry quarters. Then, about halfway through, I heard myself laugh quietly and say, "There's still somebody outside. Weird. I should close the blinds." I just stared at my phone. I had no memory of saying it. Worse than that, I had no memory of seeing anyone outside early. If you'd asked me then, I would have told you I'd first noticed him at 1:12. But there was my own voice, time-stamped just after 10:30, saying somebody was already there. I played it again. Same line. Casual. Distracted. Like it barely registered. My mouth had gone dry enough that my tongue stuck when I swallowed. I went back to the window without realizing I'd moved. He was still there. Same edge of the light. Same impossible patience. This was the point where the rationalizing got ugly. Because I could hear it happening and knew it sounded desperate. Maybe I'd seen a different person earlier. Maybe one of the neighbors had been smoking and I mentioned that without looking closely. Maybe my brain had folded two different moments together. Maybe I was just tired. I kept using maybe like I could stack enough of them into a bridge. I opened my bedroom door and listened to the building. A television muttering somewhere through the wall. Pipes knocking once. Somebody's dog giving one low irritated bark and then stopping. Normal sounds. Apartment sounds. I thought about waking the woman across the hall, but what was I supposed to say? There's a man outside and the problem is he hasn't moved enough? That sounded embarrassing even inside my own head. I was already rehearsing her expression. "Talia, it's Richmond. People stand outside. Go to sleep." So instead I texted my friend June, "Are you awake, weird guy in my lot? Lol." I added the lol because I needed her to read it like I wasn't scared. The message sent, but she didn't answer. At a little after 2, I tried calling the non-emergency number. I even had it open. But I stood there looking at the screen and couldn't do it. I kept thinking about what I'd be asked first. Is he threatening anyone? Has he tried to enter the building? What exactly is he doing? And the only answer I had was standing there. I knew how useless that would sound, so I locked my phone again and hated myself for it. Then the streetlight hiccuped. Just one fast, dim, bright flicker, enough to make the lot jump. In that tiny shift I saw him more clearly than I had all night. Pale side of a face, chin lifted, eyes already turned upward, not wandering up the building, not searching windows, already fixed on mine. I jerked back so fast my hip hit the dresser. The sound was louder than it should have been. I froze and waited for him to respond, to wave, to move, to do anything that would at least make him a person making a choice in real time. Nothing. I counted to 20 and looked again, slowly this time from the edge of the blind. Same position, same angle of the head, looking exactly where I had been standing before I moved. I don't know how to explain why that felt different from just being watched. It was the precision of it. My apartment was one of 12 windows on that side of the building. He shouldn't have been able to line himself up that perfectly unless he'd already known where I'd be. Unless he'd been looking there long enough to settle into it. The next hour went wrong in ways that were somehow small and unbearable. I turned off my bedroom light so I could see outside better, then immediately turned it back on because the dark behind me felt worse. I tried sitting on the floor by the bed out of sight of the window, but every few seconds I pictured him leaving that spot, and I had to check that he hadn't. I called June again. Straight to voicemail. I texted my downstairs neighbor Malik, who'd once helped me carry a shelf up the stairs. No answer. I opened the window another inch and heard the streetlight buzz, the far-off hush of cars on Main, leaves scraping along the curb, and underneath it all that dead silent patch. Where he stood, like sound itself was giving him space. At around 2:30 his shadow moved again. His body didn't. That's still the part I go back to when I try to talk myself out of the whole thing. The light was fixed. The pavement was fixed. He was fixed. But the dark behind him drew in closer to his feet, then thinned, then angled outward like he'd turned his shoulders a fraction. I remember rubbing my eyes hard enough to see color. When I looked back, it had settled. Him unchanged. Shadow wrong. I tried the leasing office emergency line next. It rang and then gave me a full voicemail box. I laughed once, just out of my nose, because of course it did. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone, and that was the first time I noticed how cold they were. The room wasn't cold. The window was only cracked a little. But my fingers felt stiff and almost numb, like I'd been outside too long. A little before 3, I made another memo because I didn't trust my own memory anymore. I said the time out loud. Said he was still there. Said if I listened back later and it sounded like I was exaggerating, I wasn't. While I was recording, I caught myself looking at the screen instead of the window. And the second I realized that, I snapped my head up. He was staring directly at me. Not at the apartment. Not at the row of windows. At me. Perfectly centered. Like there was a string from his face to mine. And what hit me all at once was that I had stepped to the window without thinking. Straight into the same place I'd been standing every other time. He hadn't adjusted. He'd been aimed there already. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. I stumbled back until my calves hit the bed. I couldn't make myself blink. I kept thinking, if he moves now, if he takes one step, if he even lifts a hand, I am going to lose my mind. But he didn't. He just kept looking exactly where I would be if I let myself drift back to that spot. That was the part with no room left in it for explanations. A guy waiting for a ride gets bored, checks his phone, paces, leaves. A locked-out tenant buzzes a neighbor, curses, sits on the curb. Even someone trying to creep somebody out does normal human things by accident, scratches their face, shifts weight, looks around when a car passes. He was operating on a rule I didn't understand, and the rule had me in it. I called 911 then, I finally did. I kept my voice low and tried to sound coherent. Third-floor apartment, man in lot for hours, won't move, keeps staring at my window. The dispatcher asked if he had a weapon. I said I couldn't tell. Asked if he'd attempted entry. I said no. Asked what exactly he was doing. And there it was again, the humiliating answer. Standing there. She said officers would check the area when available. I knew what that meant, not urgent. I spent the rest of the night in my bedroom with the lamp on and the blinds mostly shut, leaving just enough space to see the light in the place where he should be. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I paced from the bed to the dresser to the door and back until my knees felt hollow. Once I crouched beside the outlet because it was the only place in the room that felt tucked away, and I stayed there so long my foot went pins and needles dead. Every few minutes I looked. Still there. At some point the sky started thinning from black to that ugly dark blue that makes everything look bruised. Birds started up in little uncertain chirps. A delivery truck groaned somewhere down the street. The streetlight shut off with a click I felt in my teeth. And the parking lot was empty. No walking away. No final glance. No retreat I could track. 1 second there had been a man occupying that exact patch of ground. The next second daylight touched it and there was nothing in it at all. The police came after 7. They took a statement in my kitchen while the building smelled like burnt toast and somebody's coffee. One officer looked down at the lot and asked if maybe the person had been waiting for a ride share. I almost laughed in his face. They checked around, talked to nobody I know, and left. No footprints worth anything on the pavement. No cameras pointed the right direction. Just me, sleep-deprived and sounding worse every time I tried to make it logical. I didn't leave the apartment that day. I called out of work and sat on the edge of my bed with the blinds shut and my phone in my hand. Every time I looked at the voice memo app, I felt sick. I kept thinking about my own earlier recording, about the line I'd said without really noticing. There's still somebody outside. Still, like he'd already been part of the night before I let him become real to me. I stopped recording memos after that. Completely. People think that's the small detail, the harmless one. It isn't. That ritual was how I closed out the day. It was proof that the day happened in an order I understood. After that night, I couldn't trust what I might casually say into a phone and only understand hours later. I couldn't trust the idea that I notice things when they begin. What I keep coming back to is the near miss in it, the part that sounds almost stupid until you sit with it. I only checked the window at 1:12 because I couldn't remember whether my car was locked. If I hadn't had that stupid little burst of anxiety, if I'd just gone to sleep like a normal person, how long would he have kept standing there before I noticed at all? And if my own memo is right, he was already there when I first recorded that night. talking into my phone with the blinds still open. So now, when I wake up for no reason and the room feels wrong, I don't go to the window anymore. I lie there and look at the red charging light on my dresser and think about how long somebody can be present before your brain agrees to see them. I moved out that winter. Different neighborhood, different building, second floor this time. Curtains thick enough that morning doesn't get in unless I want it to. I still haven't gotten back into the habit of talking before bed. Sometimes I unlock the recorder and just hold the phone there, thumb over the button, waiting to see if I already have something to say. I never do. Or maybe I just don't want proof that I might. The thing that bothers me now isn't even his face, because I never really saw it. It's that fixed place under the streetlight. That exact patch of pavement. If I hadn't checked at 1:12 in the morning, I don't know how much longer he would have stayed in position before I finally noticed him, or whether the first thing I would have seen would have been him looking up at a window I hadn't gone near yet. And sometimes in that thin second before sleep, I still picture him not moving when the car passed, like he knew from the beginning that there was nowhere else I was going to end up. The worst stories, at least the ones I believe, aren't always about somebody outside. Sometimes the thing that gets under your skin is what already has access to your day, your habits, your little systems you trust because they're convenient. I learned that by looking through glass. The next one starts with a message on a screen, and I think that's almost worse, because a window at least lets you know where the boundary is supposed to be. Story 2. The messages before I sent them. The first message didn't scare me. That's important, I think. If it had come in at midnight, or from a blank number, or said something obviously threatening, maybe I would have responded differently. But it arrived in the middle of a normal workday, right between a reschedule request and a receipt from my dentist. It looked ordinary. Clean little bubble, polite tone, exactly the kind of thing I saw all week. Confirming tomorrow at 2:30 works perfectly. Thanks, Leona. The problem was I hadn't scheduled anything for tomorrow at 2:30. Not yet. I was still looking at the notes. My name is Leona Vale. I was 31, working from home in San Diego in a second-floor condo in North Park, with a tiny office I had made out of what was supposed to be a dining nook. I coordinated branding projects for a few small businesses, so my whole life ran through a shared calendar. Booking links, color-coded blocks, reminders, client notes, follow-up, windows, all of it. I liked working alone. I mean, really liked it. Cold coffee, fan humming on the shelf, door half shut, no one touching my desk. It was early spring, bright outside but cool in the apartment because the tile held the night. Everything about my job depended on structure, and structure was something I trusted. That afternoon I had 3 browser tabs open, my desktop fan clicking once every rotation because one blade was chipped, and a mug of coffee that had gone cold enough to smell bitter and dusty. I was building out next week's schedule, moving calls around because a client in Phoenix needed to shift. I kept my shared calendar open on one screen and a private notes file on the other, where I drafted ideas before I turned them into anything public. That's how I kept things clean. Public calendar for confirmed plans, private notes for the messy thinking first. I typed out a possible meeting for the next day at 2:30, only in the private notes, not saved to the calendar yet, because I was still deciding whether it made sense between 2 design reviews. Before I even finished rewriting the line, my messaging app refreshed without a sound and a client named Aaron sent, "Tomorrow at 2:30 works perfectly. Thanks, Leona." I remember smiling, actually smiling, because I thought, wow, I must have already sent that and forgotten. That was my first instinct, not panic, not suspicion. Just a warm, forgiving explanation. I have a lot of tabs open. I move fast. Maybe I copied the time into the booking thread 20 minutes ago and my brain didn't stamp it. It happens. Or maybe Aaron was replying to an earlier suggestion I'd made out loud on our last call. There are so many normal ways information repeats itself once it's in circulation. Still, I checked. No message from me about 2:30. No calendar entry. No draft sent. Just my note on the left side of the screen and his confirmation on the right, like he'd reached across a wall that was supposed to be solid. I sat there with one hand still on the mouse, listening to the fan tick, trying not to turn something minor into a mood. It felt off, sure, but not impossible. Apps sync strangely. People misremember. Time suggestions get recycled. I answered him with a simple, "Great, I'll send a formal invite shortly," and told myself that if I couldn't reconstruct the path of every work detail in real time, that wasn't evidence of anything except being busy. For the next hour I kept moving. I built calendars, answered 2 client questions, adjusted an invoice, and let the oddness flatten out. That's what I do when something small doesn't make sense. I absorb it into the day. If you work alone long enough, you get good at not dramatizing glitches. You can't stop every time a platform hiccups. You'd never finish anything. Then the second wrong thing happened. I typed a private note for myself under a client file. "Ask Maya whether husband can join the consult." She mentioned his availability last week. I didn't save it yet because I was still rewording it. While I was deleting and retyping husband as partner, a message notification slid in from Maya. "Can he join too, or is that too many people for the consult?" I felt this weird little hollow under my ribs, not sharp, just sudden empty space. Because that wasn't a calendar block anymore. It wasn't even a formal scheduling item. It was a sentence I had just typed in my private notes, half-phrased, unsaved. I told myself there were still normal explanations. Maya had probably already planned to ask that exact question. It wasn't a rare question. People brought spouses or business partners to calls all the time. And I had literally written it because she'd hinted at it before. So maybe what unsettled me was just the timing, and timing is one of those things people turn into patterns, because the brain hates randomness. I even said that out loud. Bad timing. Weird coincidence. That's all. But I started noticing my posture after that, the way I was holding my shoulders too high. The way my hands kept hovering over the keyboard instead of resting. At a little after 4, a new contact appeared in my messages. No profile picture, no company name. Just a number I didn't know and a little gray bubble that said, "Good choice moving Aaron later. That leaves your evening cleaner." I stared at it long enough for the screen to dim. Nobody should have had that sentence. I hadn't told Aaron I was moving him later. I hadn't finalized it. And "leave your evening cleaner" was the kind of phrasing that bothered me in a way I couldn't explain right then. Too familiar. Not quite intimate, but leaning in that direction. I still didn't go straight to fear. That's the embarrassing part. I went to optimism. Wrong contact sync, I thought. Some kind of calendar integration issue. Maybe a client had forwarded thread data into the wrong channel. Maybe a platform update was surfacing internal notes to external contacts. That would have been awful. But it would have been fixable awful. Ordinary awful. So I replied, "Sorry, I think this came through to the wrong person." No answer. I opened my calendar permissions, checked linked accounts, looked through automation settings, nothing obvious. Everything still looked clean. My office felt smaller by then. Fan blowing stale air across the desk. Coffee gone flat and sour in the mug. Outside, somebody was leaf blowing a courtyard, that dry rattling roar rising and fading, rising and fading. My calendar refreshed once, silently. No pop-up, no flicker. Just a tiny change in the corner that told me it had updated. Another message from the unknown contact. Type whatever makes you comfortable. I didn't touch the keyboard. Then the next bubble appeared. You were going to say, "This is Leona. Can you tell me who this is?" I had not typed it. But that was exactly what I had been about to type. Not the general idea of it. The sentence. Same words, same order. The cursor on my screen blinked in the empty message field, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. A hard little knocking that made swallowing feel loud. I stood up so fast my chair rolled back into the wall. The room hadn't changed, but all at once it felt handled. That's the word I keep coming back to. Handled. My desk lamp, my keyboard with the shine worn off the A and E keys, the notebook where I kept billing codes, the shared calendar with its neat little colored blocks. All of it felt like somebody had already touched it with their eyes too many times. I looked at the office door even though I lived alone and knew it was shut because I'd shut it myself. I called my friend Nisha, who works in it and never laughs at me when I don't understand some platform problem. She answered on the second ring, speaker muffled with traffic on her end. I told her what was happening, trying to keep my voice even so I'd sound credible. She immediately said it sounded like an account compromise. Change passwords, sign out of everything, revoke devices, check email forwarding rules, basic breach response. The relief I felt hearing that was immediate and almost stupid, because breach meant human scale. Breach meant known category, annoying, invasive, expensive maybe, but understandable. Someone got in where they shouldn't have and I could kick them out. I needed that explanation so badly I grabbed it with both hands. I spent the next hour doing exactly what she said. New passwords, long ugly ones, two-factor on every account, logged out of all sessions, revoked third-party calendar access, cleared browser credentials, changed my messaging app security settings. I even unplugged my desktop fan for a minute because the clicking sound had started making me feel watched, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I couldn't take one more repetitive thing in the room. And then the messages stopped. Completely. For several hours there was nothing from the unknown number, nothing strange from clients, no calendar weirdness, no replies that knew things they shouldn't. I ran fresh security scans, checked login histories, found 2 old sessions on a tablet I'd already sold and 1 login from a coffee shop network weeks earlier that was probably me. I told myself that was it. Sloppy credential hygiene, old device overlap, maybe a scheduling plugin acting up under compromised permissions. Bad afternoon. Solved problem. By evening I had convinced myself enough to order takeout. I ate on the couch with my laptop closed, television on low, trying to let my body unclench. The condo smelled like soy sauce and the candle I lit near the sink because the kitchen trash needed taking out. I remember thinking, specifically. I'm glad I handled that before it became a real nightmare. That's how convinced I was by then. I even texted Nisha a thank you and told her I owed her dinner. Around 9, I went back into the office just to check tomorrow's calendar one last time. Pure habit. The desk looked harmless again. Lamp warm on the wood. The fan back on, soft hum now that I'd tightened the screw. I sat down, logged into the calendar. Everything normal. Then the unknown contact sent another message. No hello, no preamble, just an image. I opened it, and for one stupid second my brain didn't understand what I was looking at. It was a screenshot of my desktop. My calendar on the right, notes file on the left, message window open at the bottom. The same arrangement I was looking at in front of me. The cursor in the screenshot sat in the lower message field, angled slightly left at the exact point where my own cursor was blinking now. I checked the timestamp on the message. It was from earlier that afternoon before I'd changed a single password. Something cold and heavy moved through me all at once, like an elevator dropping half a floor, because that meant the person had not just seen some synced data. They had seen my screen. My actual screen. They had captured it while I was sitting there. Before I could even process that fully, another message came in underneath the screenshot. You deleted the last sentence. That made less sense at first until I remembered. Earlier in my private notes, while drafting a reschedule message to a client, I had typed and then erased a line because it sounded too personal. If you need the morning instead, I can make that work. I deleted it before saving anything, before sending, before anyone could have read it. My fingers slid on the mouse because my palm had gone damp. I opened the notes file, scrolled. Nothing there. Of course, nothing there. I deleted it. But the stranger had it. Not paraphrased. Exact sentence. They sent it in the next message. If you need the morning instead, I can make that work. There are different kinds of fear. This wasn't the loud kind. It was intimate. It felt like discovering your bedroom window had been unlatched for months. Not a break-in you can point to, not shattered glass, just the sick realization that something private was never private in the first place. I looked at the dark monitor reflection and could see my own shoulders hunched up, my mouth slightly open, and behind me the office doorway, black rectangle. No movement. I still checked it twice. I called Nisha again. No answer. I called my building manager because for some reason I needed another human voice. Straight to voicemail. I almost called the police, then stopped because what was I reporting? Someone had access to my computer. Someone had my deleted sentence. Someone maybe had an image taken from inside my system while I was home alone. All of that was real. None of it felt reportable in a way that would match the feeling of it. Then the contact started typing. I didn't wait to read it. I yanked the Ethernet cable from the desktop, shut the laptop lid, powered off the modem, pulled the router plug from the wall so hard the plastic plate shifted. My spare charging cords fell behind the desk. I left them there. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my phone, and walked out of the condo in slippers because I couldn't waste the time changing shoes. The hallway smelled like somebody's laundry detergent and warm drywall. I locked the door, then unlocked it again because I thought I'd forgotten the laptop, then decided I didn't care and locked it a second time with hands that wouldn't quite work. I drove to a hotel near Mission Valley and spent the night there with the television on and my phone face down in the bathroom sink because I couldn't stand the idea of a screen lighting up near me. Every sound in that room made me sit upright. Ice machine down the hall. Elevator cables. The soft knock from plumbing in the wall. I kept thinking about the screenshot, about the cursor placed exactly where mine sat now, and about how long somebody has to watch your working day before they start predicting the shape of your sentences. I never went back to shared scheduling after that. I meet clients through email now, confirm times by phone, and keep appointments in a paper planner with tabs that stain my fingers blue from the ink. People tell me that sounds inefficient, and they're right, it is. But paper stays where I leave it. If a sentence gets crossed out, I can still see the pressure mark under it. I don't have to wonder whether someone read the thought before I decided it wasn't for anyone else. The unresolved part isn't whether somebody breached my accounts. Somebody did. It isn't whether they had access to my screen. They did. The part that still opens back up when I think about it is smaller and worse. One of those messages included a sentence I deleted before I ever saved or sent it. Not a formal event. Not a synced note. Not a draft that sat in some cloud server for an hour. A line that existed then didn't. I still don't know what system would have caught that, or how long it had been catching things like it. So now when I start typing something private, I still pause after a few words and look at the blank space around the cursor like I half expect someone to answer before I finish. For a while after that, I couldn't stand notification sounds, even the good ones. Especially the good ones. That soft little tone that used to mean a client confirmed a call started feeling like a hand on the back of my neck. I changed numbers, rebuilt devices, moved files offline. But the thing about violation is it doesn't stop when the access stops, if it ever did. It lingers in the habits, in the way I angle my screen away from windows, in the way I still write first drafts on a legal pad and tear the top sheet off when I'm done. And the next story gets at a different version of that feeling. One that isn't about messages arriving early. It's about seeing your own pattern outside yourself and realizing somebody might not just know your route. They might know it before you do. Story 3. The route that matched mine. If you walk the same neighborhood long enough, you stop thinking of it as public. I know that sounds unreasonable, but it's true. The corner where you always retie your shoe becomes yours a little. The stretch of sidewalk where the hedge smells sharp after rain becomes yours. The pause at the four-way stop where you check traffic and your knees loosen becomes part of a sequence your body knows better than your mind. So when I first saw another route laid over mine almost exactly, I didn't feel threatened. I felt corrected in a way I didn't like. Like my private map had leaked out and come back slightly wrong. My name is Dana Voss. I was 42, living alone in South Minneapolis, in a narrow blue house near Minnehaha Avenue, with a detached garage and a front walk that always held ice longer than the rest of the block. I work in quality compliance for a medical supply company, which is a dull way of saying I spend all day identifying ordinary failures before they turn into expensive ones. I like systems, clean categories, repeatable conditions. Every evening after dinner, I walked the neighborhood and tracked it through a fitness app that generates those little heat maps, brighter where you repeat the same route. It was routine. Not a wellness journey, not soul-searching, just 45 minutes, same shoes, same post-walk tea. It was late fall, the kind of Minneapolis cold that makes wood smoke travel far. You'd smell one fireplace 3 streets away and think it was next door. Gravel crunched under my shoes where the city had half-heartedly treated the sidewalks. Most of the residential stretches were quiet enough that I'd go 5 or 6 minutes without seeing anybody. I liked that. I am very comfortable alone. Maybe too comfortable. Routine can turn into a shell before you notice. One night after a walk, I was standing in my kitchen with the kettle starting to hiss when I opened the app to check distance and saw a suggested community overlay. Another user's route had been highlighted because it shared a high percentage of my path. Same loop down 42nd, cut left at the park edge, slow segment by the dead ash tree, then back north toward home. At first I filed it under ordinary urban overlap. Shared routes happen. Popular blocks are popular for a reason: good lighting, even sidewalks, less traffic. The part that made me pause was the pauses. The overlay showed little densest points where the other walker had slowed or stopped, and they aligned with mine in a way that was statistically annoying. The curb cut where I always adjust my gloves. The chain-link fence with the gap in the slats where I sometimes look through at the empty tennis courts. The bench I never sit on but almost always hesitate beside because that's where I decide whether to extend the loop another 10 minutes. Not exact to the foot maybe, but close enough that I remember narrowing my eyes and thinking the app was over-smoothing the data. That was my first explanation. Heat map smoothing. Location aggregation, GP's drift correction. I had 3 good technical reasons before the kettle finished boiling. I deal with false precision all day. Data looks cleaner than reality. Platforms round, interpolate, infer. People see a neat pattern and forget how much software has massaged it into that shape. So I made tea, put a lemon slice in it, and let the issue fall into the category of visually persuasive but meaningless. For the next few days, though, I kept checking. The overlap appeared again before I'd even finished my walk one evening. I noticed because I glanced at the app at a stoplight while I was still outside. There was already a bright line tracing the blocks ahead of me, the same ones I intended to take. Again, I had an answer ready. Cached route suggestion. Predictive surfacing based on prior behavior. If a platform knows you usually turn left, it will visually privilege that option. That's not stalker logic, that's user engagement logic. Boring. Irritating maybe, but boring. Except the route didn't just continue where my habits suggested. It included a pause at the church parking lot fence where I had stopped only once before, weeks earlier, because my shoelace snapped and I had to double knot it. Not a common landmark, not scenic. Not anything another walker would logically mark unless they had their own reason. Even then, there are only so many places a GPS line can bunch. I knew all that. I also knew my shoulders had stiffened under my coat. I checked the profile attached to the overlay. No photo, no name I recognized, just initials, DV, which made me snort because my own initials are DV too. There was no bio, no friend request, nothing overt. The app made a cheerful little note that I might know this user based on similar activity. That was the first thing about it that felt less threatening than incorrect. Similar activity, maybe. But the initials. The timing. It was like a joke told by somebody who had only heard a joke described. I contacted the app's support chat the next morning. I used clear language, because clear language usually gets results. I asked whether overlays could display predicted segments before a walk concluded. I asked whether anonymized community profiles could borrow initials from local contacts or device metadata. I asked whether location resolution was ever tightened using habitual user patterns. The support person gave me canned responses in 3 separate messages and closed the chat by suggesting I disable social features if I found them distracting. Distracting, that's the word they used. Fine, I disabled social features. The overlay still appeared. That more than anything dismantled my first explanation. If a behavior persists after the related feature is off, you don't keep attributing it to the feature. That's basic troubleshooting. So I moved to the second explanation, local user coincidence plus delayed interface bug. Somebody in my neighborhood had nearly the same route. The app was caching prior overlap in a way that made it look predictive. Unpleasant but still human scale. Still solvable. Then the route included a detour I had only considered. This happened on a Friday evening. I remember because I had stayed late reviewing a batch discrepancy and my walk started after dark instead of at dusk. The air smelled like frozen dirt and old leaves. I was coming up on the little market on 38th where I usually turned right, and for no important reason at all I thought about continuing straight for 2 extra blocks. I didn't decide. I just thought it. One of those casual half-formed changes that never becomes a plan unless your feet commit to it. My phone buzzed with the app's end-of-activity summary preview even though I was still moving. I looked down. The route shown on the screen went straight for 2 extra blocks before curving back. I stopped walking. Not because I believed some impossible thing all at once. I stopped because a pattern had entered the territory where my existing explanation couldn't comfortably hold it. I was standing under a street lamp that made the frost on parked cars look powdered. No one near me. Houses dark except for blue television light in one front room. My breath came out in thin, pale threads. I stared at the map and waited for annoyance to surface. Because annoyance is easier to carry than dread. Instead, I felt this dry alertness spread through me, like every joint had quietly tightened. I turned right, my usual way, just to contradict the screen. The route on the display didn't update. It stayed with the straight detour for another second, then redrew in a little jump as if correcting a mistake after I'd already made the choice. That was when I started treating it as an active problem. I went home, sat at my dining table with my coat still on, and exported my past month of route data. I cross-referenced timestamps, compared pauses, measured overlaps. What bothered me wasn't that another user had similar patterns. In a residential neighborhood, that can happen. What bothered me was the sequence of almost right details. They were too intimate for random overlap and too imperfect for exact surveillance. My regular pause by the tennis courts was marked a few yards too far west, as if someone knew I stopped there but not why. A turn I took to avoid a puddle one rainy night reappeared later on a dry evening in the other profile, like a copied gesture detached from its condition. The mimicry was close enough to feel deliberate and wrong enough to feel studied rather than shared. I should say here that I did not feel helpless. Not then. I felt tasked. That's the difference in my head. A system anomaly had to be identified. A data leak, a local user, maybe someone I'd inadvertently shared app access with. I changed my password. Revoked device permissions. Turned off location history synchronization. Then, because I prefer evidence to mood, I planned a test walk for the next evening. Unpredictable route, last-minute choices. No visible phone checks. The next night was colder. harder air. The kind that dries the inside of your nose. I left at my usual time to preserve the baseline, then immediately broke pattern by heading south instead of east. My boots made a crunchy, hollow sound on the packed grit. I passed the bakery vent that always smelled faintly sweet at that hour. Cut through a side street I almost never used, then doubled back toward the park. I told myself almost clinically that if the overlay followed, then I had a severe application problem or a privacy breach. If it didn't, good. Category restored. Halfway down a long dark block with no pedestrians, I felt the urge to look up before I understood why. Someone was ahead of me on the sidewalk, maybe 40 feet, dressed in a dark coat and knit cap. Nothing unusual there. The unusual part was where they stopped. Right beside the storm drain on the corner where I always paused to stretch my left calf because the pavement there slopes slightly and takes the pressure off. It isn't scenic. There is no reason to stop there unless you know what that exact spot feels like under your foot. I slowed. The person ahead stood with their body angled the way I stand there. Not exactly. Close. Weight shifted onto the right leg instead of the left. Head dipped a little too far. It looked like somebody imitating a gesture from memory. My mouth went dry so fast it hurt. I could hear my own boots now, loud and stupid on the grit. The person didn't turn fully. Just a slight adjustment of the shoulders as if anticipating the line I'd take around them. So I changed direction. I stepped off the sidewalk toward the curb before I really chose to. The person ahead adjusted too. Not after. Before. A tiny pivot. Same new line. Every controlled explanation I had been using all week dropped out from under me at once. Not because I suddenly understood everything. Because I understood nothing. It wasn't a local user with similar habits. It wasn't a visual glitch. It wasn't even cleanly someone following in the usual sense. It was something worse for being so specific. Someone had learned my route as an arrangement of small private preferences and was reenacting it imperfectly in front of me. My chest tightened high and hard, not pain exactly. Just a clamp that made each breath too shallow. The air felt papery in my throat. I could hear a distant engine, wind scraping dry leaves against a fence, the tiny click of the crossing signal half a block away. The person still hadn't turned all the way around. That almost made it worse. As if the performance mattered more than acknowledging me. I did the one thing I hadn't planned because it violated every instinct I had about preserving distance from an unknown variable. I walked faster. My steps sounded wrong, too quick, sloppy on the gravel. I remember flexing my hands inside my gloves because my fingers had gone stiff. The person ahead resumed walking. Same pace I usually settle into on that stretch. Same slight hesitation at the cracked sidewalk square near the big maple root. It would have been funny if it hadn't made my skin feel too tight. When I got within 10 feet, I said, "Excuse me." No response. Closer, I said, louder, "Hey." The person stopped again. Did not turn, and I knew, with that miserable certainty you get a second before doing something irreversible, that if I let them keep the pattern I would carry it differently forever. So I stepped directly into their path. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no grabbing. I just moved in front of them hard enough that they had to stop or hit me. My heart was beating high in my throat. The cold had gone out of the air entirely. I felt hot under my scarf. When they finally looked at me, all I saw clearly were ordinary features arranged without expression. Middle-aged, maybe. Not someone I knew. Eyes steady. Mouth relaxed, no surprise at all. That absence was its own kind of wrongness. Most people react when you cut them off in the dark. Annoyance, apology, confusion, something. I said, "Why are you following my route?" They looked at me for 1 second longer than a normal person would, then glanced past my shoulder toward the way I had come from. When they spoke, their voice was quiet and even. "You changed it." That was all. Then they stepped sideways off the sidewalk, crossed between 2 parked cars, and walked away down the street without looking back. I didn't follow. I didn't call after them. The confrontation I'd imagined in abstract had assumed speech, denial, some exchange that would collapse the weirdness back into human proportions. Instead, I got one sentence that made the whole thing feel less explained than before. "You changed it." Not "I was matching you." Not "I know you." Just a correction, like I had failed to perform my own part properly. I went straight home, locked the door, shut every blind, and turned off location permissions on every device I owned. Then I deleted the fitness app and stood in my kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum and the hot water pipe tick in the wall, waiting for my body to accept that the walk was over. It didn't. My hands kept trembling in small, precise bursts, not visible unless I held them out against the light. I made tea and forgot to drink it. I still walk, but not on a schedule and never along the same sequence 2 days in a row. I don't track anything now. No heat map, no step count, no road archive. People assume that means I felt watched. That's only partly true. What I felt more deeply was miscopied, reduced to observable fragments. A pause here, a turn there, a hesitation at a bench with none of the actual reasons inside, like someone had built a version of me from the outside and was testing it in public. The question I can't answer is motive. Why do that at all? Why reproduce my route before I walked it, even when I changed plans at the last minute? Was it meant to steer me, reassure them, unsettle me, measure how predictable I was? I don't know. I only know the routes appeared first, and the person on the sidewalk moved like they were waiting for me to fit into something already drafted. So now, even years later, if I'm walking and I catch myself slowing at a familiar corner, I make myself keep going until my legs start to ache, because I'd rather get lost on purpose than ever again feel like somebody reached my stopping place before I did. After that happened, I started noticing how much of modern life is just us volunteering our habits into neat little visual summaries. Routes, timestamps, patterns, proof of where we were and how often we returned. The last story isn't about walking or messages. It's about footage, and about a man whose whole job was supposed to be watching other people's recordings without leaving anything of himself behind. That's what makes it land so badly. He didn't realize the archive had started collecting him too. Story 4, the footage I didn't record. For a long time I described this as a glitch because glitch is a small word. It keeps things manageable. A file in the wrong folder, a timestamp mismatch, a duplicate save. Work in security review trains you to name the category first and react second. That's useful until the category stops fitting and your body understands it before your brain does. By the time I quit saying glitch, the part that should have scared me most had already happened 3 separate times, and I had filed each one as routine. My name is Elliot Crane. I was 33, working nights in Dallas for a private contractor that reviewed security footage for commercial properties, mostly warehouses, office parks, and storage facilities where nothing dramatic happened 99 nights out of 100. I carried 2 phones because work calls had a way of bleeding into life otherwise, and I didn't want clients or supervisors on my personal line. The office was a small sealed room on the 2nd floor of a logistics building near the design district. No windows, stale air, electronics heat, 4 monitors humming from dusk until morning. The job was repetitive in a way I liked. Watch feeds, log incidents, archive clips, follow protocol. This started in late summer when the air outside still felt hot after midnight and the building's air conditioning overcompensated so badly the office always smelled faintly, metallic like coal dust in warmed-up circuits. I was halfway through an overnight shift eating dry crackers from the vending machine when I found a video file in the archive queue that didn't have a corresponding incident log. That happens sometimes. You clip first, document later, then forget. I assumed it was mine. The file label was generic, just a site code and time. I opened it expecting a false alarm, and it was almost that. A hallway in a storage facility, empty, harsh fluorescent lighting, nothing moving, 32 seconds of nothing I could see worth saving. I checked the log system, no entry. I figured I'd clipped it while distracted and failed to document. Annoying but ordinary. I added a note to reconcile later and kept working. That's how the first wrong things slipped past. They were boring on arrival. Over the next week, I found 3 more archive files with no matching logs. One showed the rear loading dock of an office park from an angle that wasn't listed in the site's camera layout. Another showed a service corridor with a field of view that seemed too high and too far left, as if the camera had been mounted in a place no camera actually was. Again, my first response wasn't fear. It was curiosity. Misassigned source mapping, maybe. Wrong camera metadata. A contractor updated hardware without updating the diagram. Those are solvable problems. They even make a kind of satisfying sense if you're wired the way I am. So I investigated. I pulled the site plans, compared camera IDs to footage headers, checked system logs against archive paths. The recorded timestamps were off in a subtle way, not wildly wrong, just misaligned from the official logs by enough minutes to irritate but not enough to scream fraud, like somebody had nudged each file slightly out of sync with the paperwork. That kind of detail told me more than the content did. Big mistakes are often accidents. Small, consistent ones usually aren't. Still, I wasn't in danger. Not as I understood danger then. I was sitting at my desk in a climate-controlled office with badge access and cameras on every hallway. The threat, if there was one, was administrative, a compromised storage workflow, unauthorized clipping, maybe someone using the system after hours under another operator's credentials. My job was to figure out how. The first file that should have changed the tone for me didn't, and that's what gets under my skin now. It was just after 1 in the morning. My spare work phone was charging beside the keyboard, vibrating every so often with automated dispatch notices. I opened a clip attached to a warehouse stairwell ticket expecting to confirm a door alarm. Instead, the video showed me at my desk, not from the front security feed in the office. There isn't one. We weren't monitored inside the review room for confidentiality reasons. This angle was from behind and above my right shoulder, close enough to show the cowlick at the back of my head and the way I lean left when scrubbing footage. On the desk you could see my cracker wrapper. My mouse pad, my spare phone charging, the monitors cast that flat blue light over everything. I was watching video in the clip while watching the clip in real time. I remember my first thought exactly. Because it was so stupid, I thought, somebody set up a temporary training camera and forgot to tell me. That's the investigator brain. It doesn't deny anomalies. It chases them into whatever shape keeps the world workable a little longer. Training audit, hidden internal test, supervisor review. I started looking for reflections, lens distortion, any cue that would tell me what device had captured it. The angle didn't correspond to anything in the room. Too high for a phone on a shelf, too stable for handheld, wrong line entirely for the smoke detector or corners. I should have stood up then and checked the office physically. I didn't. I opened properties, export data, header information. The file had been created during a shift 2 nights earlier when I had definitely been in that same chair. The system log showed no clip initiation from my account at that time. I zoomed in on the image instead as if more detail would make it less impossible. The stale office air had that cold, dry taste it gets around 2 in the morning, the kind that makes you want water even though you're not thirsty. Monitor fans whispered. Somewhere in the hallway outside, the building settled with a soft pop in the metal framing. In the video, I reached for my spare phone at the exact moment my real hand started moving toward it now. Not perfectly synced. Off by maybe a second, enough to make it feel not live, just near. I closed the file, opened it again. Same. That was when I started assembling instead of processing. Separate pile in my head, impossible angle, no log entry. Timestamp mismatch. Me at desk. I wasn't panicking, I was cataloging, which can look a lot like calm from the outside. I called my supervisor, Trent, straight to voicemail. I left a message about a likely internal system issue and sent him 2 clipped screenshots. No answer. Overnight supervisors sleep like the dead until the world forces them up. Then I checked the office. There wasn't much to check. 1 door, 1 drop ceiling, 1 vent, 1 shelf unit with old binders, 1 water-stained wall panel, 4 monitors, cable trough under the desk. No hidden camera taped anywhere obvious. No extra hardware. No unfamiliar devices on the network list that I could see from my access level. I used my phone flashlight to look above the monitor mounts anyway. Dust, screws, dead bug in the corner. Nothing. That should have comforted me. Instead, it gave the wrong details more room. I went back through the archive files, the impossible hallway angles, the off-log clips, the timestamp drift. Once I'd seen myself in one, the earlier files changed shape in my head. They no longer looked like random junk. They looked like proof of someone testing what they could record without being noticed. Coverage zones just beyond official cameras. Dead areas made visible. Blind spots mapped. Preparation, not accident. At around 2:30, I found multiple files tagged to hours I had not been in the office at all. One during a Sunday afternoon when the building was closed, another just before dawn on my day off. One labeled with a site code that wasn't even in my active queue anymore. I opened them one by one. Most were short. Hallways, loading bays, exterior doors. Empty break rooms with vending machine lights. But they were chosen. That's what I feel now, looking back. Chosen angles, chosen absences. Doorways from positions that taught somebody the geometry of a place. The patience of it is what scares me more than any single image. Whoever did it wasn't grabbing random footage. They were learning spaces. Then I hit a clip from hours I had been off-site entirely, and in the reflection of a dark monitor in the frame you could just barely make out the outline of someone sitting at my desk. Not clearly. Not enough for a face, just enough for me to understand that when I thought the office was empty on nights I wasn't there, that may only have been true for me. That's when my body finally joined the investigation. My chest tightened. Not dramatic, just a steady squeeze that made me keep taking incomplete breaths. Sweat gathered under my shirt between my shoulder blades even though the room was cold. I could feel my pulse in my hands where they rested on the desk, little taps against the wood through my fingertips. I texted Trent again. No answer. I tried the building's security desk downstairs. It rang unanswered. Shift change, maybe. Bathroom break, maybe. Those were still the explanations I offered myself because I needed at least one working piece of reality. The file that ended it came in while I was watching the archive folder. I saw it appear. No refresh sound. Just a new line populating in the list with the current time in the label. Current. Not 5 minutes ago. Not yesterday, misfiled. Current. I opened it. The clip showed the office from behind me, same impossible angle as before. Same monitors. Same stale little room. Same spare work phone charging on the desk. Same cracker wrapper. I was in the chair wearing the same gray overshirt I had on that moment. One elbow on the armrest, leaning toward the center monitor. For a second I thought it was a delayed recording of the present, and my brain grabbed at that because delayed still belongs to physics. Then the version of me in the video turned slightly toward the left monitor. I had not moved yet. I know that sentence sounds simple, but it breaks something in your body when you experience it. I watched myself begin a motion my real muscles had not started. My throat closed halfway. The taste in my mouth went metallic, sharp and dry. I sat there frozen for one terrible second with the knowledge of the movement waiting inside me. Then my own body followed it. Turned left, exactly as the clip had shown, not because something controlled me. Because I was already the kind of person who would have turned left at that sound or that thought or that flicker. The file knew my next motion because someone had learned me that well, or had been recording long enough to predict the sequence. And then in the clip, the version of me looked just past the left monitor, toward the office door behind my shoulder, and its head tilted a fraction before mine did. That was the worst moment. Not the impossible angle, not the archive. That tiny anticipatory tilt as if the recorded me had heard something arriving behind us first. I did not look at the door. I slammed the monitor power button so hard the screen blacked out mid-frame, grabbed both phones, missed one, grabbed it again, and stood up so fast the chair tipped backward. My knees felt unreliable. Rubbery and overcorrecting. The room seemed suddenly full of little machine sounds I had filtered out all night. Fan hiss, drive ticks, the fluorescent ballast whining overhead. I could not make myself turn around slowly like a reasonable adult in a workplace. I spun all at once and almost slipped on the chair mat. The office door was shut. Nothing visible through the narrow wired glass strip beyond just the dim hall. I don't know whether someone was there. That's honest, I don't know. But the clip had gotten to the point where it knew to make me afraid of the space behind me, and that was enough. I powered the archive terminal down without following shutdown protocol, yanked my personal bag from under the desk and left the room with the lights still on and 2 monitors. Still glowing blue, the hallway outside smelled warmer than the office, stale carpet and old coffee from the break alcove. No one at the downstairs security desk, the lobby monitor cycling through silent camera feeds like nothing in the world had changed. I badged out, went to the parking lot and sat in my car with the doors locked and both phones on the passenger seat, trying to decide whether I was abandoning a shift or preserving myself from a situation that had moved beyond procedure. My hands were shaking hard enough that my keys scratched the steering column. I drove home before dawn and called Trent from my driveway. This time he answered, groggy and irritated until he heard my voice. I told him there were unauthorized archive files, impossible office footage, probable internal compromise, and that I was not going back into that building until a full forensic review happened. He kept asking what I meant by impossible angle. I couldn't explain it in a way that didn't sound unstable, so I stuck to what I could prove. Unlogged files. Timestamp discrepancies. Clip generation without operator record. He said he'd escalate. He said don't worry about the rest of the shift. I never went back. Trent said later that it found archive irregularities but nothing conclusive. Some files corrupted, some missing. Camera mapping inconsistencies blamed on old infrastructure. That kind of language. Clean enough to close a memo, not clean enough to live with. I turned in my badge by mail, found different work. I don't review recorded footage now, not even casually. If somebody sends me doorbell video or a weird parking lot clip, I don't open it. People joke about that like I'm squeamish. I'm not squeamish. I just know what it feels like when ordinary footage stops being evidence and starts acting like it's ahead of you. What makes this retroactive, what keeps it alive, is how many moments were harmless when they happened. The first unlogged file. The wrong angle on the loading dock. The Sunday timestamp. Each one arrived small enough to file. Only later did they assemble into a picture I couldn't look at without feeling my chest tighten. Someone had been using that system to learn blind spots, to record the review room, to catalog the building and maybe me inside it, long before I understood I was part of the archive. And the part I still can't answer is the size of it. How many archived files were recorded when I wasn't there? How many more angles existed that I never opened? Who was operating the system during those hours, and whether they were only mapping spaces or waiting for something more specific to line up? I left before I could find out. That was the right choice, I think. It doesn't feel like a strong one. It feels like stepping away from a table after realizing the game started before you sat down. I keep one odd habit from that job. My old spare work phone is dead now. Battery swollen, useless. But I still have it in a kitchen drawer wrapped in a microfiber cloth. I tell myself it's because I might need the old contacts someday. That's not true. The truth is simpler and harder to admit. Every once in a while I open the drawer just enough to make sure the black screen is still black, because some part of me still expects to find a file waiting there, labeled with the current time, showing the moment before I decide to look.